Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Our top story tonight is about reports that the Indian military is rebalancing its forces and firepower to cater for a two-front war. The just concluded Army Commanders Conference discussed the reorientation of forces along the northern and western borders, with the operational challenges along the line of actual control with China being analyzed in the Military Operations Directorate. In July this year, India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh spoke to his military commanders about a collusive threat, referring to China and Pakistan. Independent observers had, however, noted that there was no change in Pakistan's posture to indicate any offensive intent by Pakistan. A senior Indian military officer speaking to Times of India said that, and I quote from what he said, "The operational readiness along the line of control with Pakistan cannot be diluted since the two-front situation is a reality, but China has become the primary front, with Pakistan being relegated to the secondary one," unquote. Meanwhile, the Indian Navy is reorienting itself to tackle what Indian officials say the Chinese threat in the Indian Ocean region. As we discuss this, the quadrilateral states, India, Japan, the US, and Australia, are holding Exercise Malabar. According to an Indian Ministry of Defense statement on Monday, Exercise Malabar would, and I quote, "showcase the high levels of synergy and coordination between the friendly navies, which is based on their shared values and commitment to an open, inclusive Indo-Pacific and a rules-based international order," unquote. This formulation seems straight out of the US Department of Defense lexicon and a signal to China. Let's get right into our discussion. I'm joined by Shashnak Joshi, defense editor at The Economist. Thank you, Shashnak, for joining me. Let's start with India's reported reorientation towards IOR, as I said in my opening, an Indian Navy's shopping list, shall I say, to enhance its capabilities to that end. How much of this has to do with India's strategic closeness to the United States under Narendra Modi's government? I ask this because it is clear that while India also perceives a threat from China along the very long LAC, the US rivalry with China is obviously going to unfold in the seas.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Let's just say at the beginning, of course, that India's interest in the Indian Ocean region, its investments in things like amphibious capabilities, long-range maritime patrol aircraft, in blue water power projection capabilities into the Indian Ocean, these are things that have been pursued across successive Indian administrations, right? They have been pursued by the Modi administration for some of the reasons that you outlined, but also before that by the Manmohan Singh administration, and before that by the Vajpayee administration, steadily increasing as China's own presence in the Indian Ocean has grown. So I don't want to make out as though this is a narrow BJP agenda that is solely to do with the ephemeral circumstances of the Modi-Trump alignment on some of these things. And I believe that if Biden does emerge from today as the winner of the US election, this is going to continue, regardless of any friction that may be introduced into the US-India dynamic. But at the same time, I think it's very, very clear to say the Modi government, on many counts, has shifted closer to the US, has aligned itself, and look, it's been willing to take political steps like the signing last week of the Geospatial Intelligence Agreement, or in many cases the invitation of Australia into the Malabar exercises that you mentioned, that previous Indian governments haven't taken. So I do think that we are seeing an extension of that naval interest and naval ambition on the Indian side.
There are a couple of things that you said, and I will get back to them, but let's first talk about, as you mentioned, the recently concluded Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement. And I would say its essential link with the earlier 2018 one, that's the Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement, the COMCASA. Now, in fact, COMCASA was a mere formality without BECA, data links. Now, two questions here. One, BECA was delayed earlier because of concerns on the Indian side. So what changed? Secondly, do you believe India's access to such information now places it as a junior strategic partner of the US in the latter's threat matrix?
Those are both interesting questions. I think what has changed is part a cumulative process of Indian disillusionment with China. And as you pointed out, it's not just Beaker, it's Comcasa, it's other foundational agreements like LAMOA, the logistics agreement that was agreed. It's the expansion of the Quad. All of these things reflect greater Indian mistrust of China as seen from New Delhi. But of course, what has changed, and I don't need to tell your viewers this, is the fact that we have had the most serious standoff on the border between India and China since 1962 that has unfolded since April, including fatalities for the first time since the 1970s. That extremely serious standoff that has consumed Indian attention is what I think has enabled this Indian government to take steps that previous ones wouldn't, and Beaker is included within that. Now, is India a junior strategic partner of the United States? I think that's a fascinating question. I think right now my answer would be no. I would say Japan and Australia, in fact, my own country, the United Kingdom, are junior strategic partners of America in the sense that we are tightly aligned into formal alliance structures, and we have fought alongside the United States on many occasions. Can I imagine India really being corralled into a conflict over Korea or Taiwan or something else that doesn't concern India directly? No, I can't. I think India has retained a pretty significant freedom of maneuver here, a degree of latitude. And I still think we're likely to see caution in how far India is willing to align itself in an operational way with the United States going forward, even if it is tightening that relationship.
Right, but don't you think that the very act of getting into these foundational agreements is actually a path chosen by India? And in fact, some analysts say that the die seems to have been cast as far as the camp India has chosen. Now, it appears that the standoff in eastern Ladakh has also contributed to this. So, in any case, you mentioned that probably that's not going to happen. India fighting alongside the United States, but there is something about the interoperability. Now, that seems to be, as I see it, hardwired into the agreements India has signed with the US. What will become of India's kind of, so far, as India has always prided itself on a kind of freedom of navigation, shall I say, as far as its foreign and security policies are concerned?
I think that's a very interesting point. And of course, that point, was the precise reason why particularly Congress-led governments were so hesitant to go down that route. And so it would be foolish to deny that. I do think we should be very clear. The agreements that we have seen are still voluntary. They don't compel any kind of specific cooperation. They enable it. The U.S. can now send geospatial intelligence like satellite imagery or terrain information to Indian counterparts if they wish, but it doesn't mean they have to. It doesn't mean they're obliged to do so. It lubricates that entire process. Now, from the Indian side, I can see the benefits. We know that during this crisis with China and in previous crises, including the Doklam crisis in 2017, and in my own opinion, most likely during the Balakot crisis with Pakistan in 2019, the US did provide intelligence to India. So this has a direct benefit to India. It isn't just a constraint. I think the really interesting question we have to ask is, what does America want from India? At what point does it make an ask of India? I still think that the U.S. decision makers, they see supporting India as a kind of one-sided benefit, but that's not going to last forever. And I think that in contingencies involving the U.S. And China in other ways, there may be demands by the Americans to say, for example, we need to stage aircraft through India, refueling aircraft or ammunition in the way that was done in the first Gulf War in the 1990s. And those kind of things will create political friction in India when that time comes.
Right. A question with reference to a slightly technical one with reference to, this hardwired sort of thing that I was talking about has also to do with the non-US, non-NATO systems and platforms that India already has or is awaiting delivery of. For instance, the Russian S-400 A280 system. So how does this going to work in terms of compatibility? Or are we looking at India gradually moving further towards buying US systems and platforms?
That again is a great question. I mean, in air defense terms, the S-400, a flagship Russian air defense system, is not going to plug in very easily to U.S.-built sensors and assets in an integrated air and missile defense network. That isn't very easy. These things use completely different protocols for communicating with each other. But in other cases, I think we have to remember these are pretty discrete items, right? So you still have an Indian tank fleet that has a large number of Russian capabilities. You have Russian transport aircraft, Russian helicopters, Russian kit. But then you have U.S. maritime patrol aircraft, you have U.S. Apaches, you have U.S. howitzers coming in, and they don't have to communicate with each other in the same way. So I don't think it's a major issue. To some extent, I see India as buying Russian equipment to preserve the strategic relationship with Moscow at a time when everyone can see that India is drifting away from Russia towards the United States. Arms sales from Russia are an easy and simple way to maintain that relationship and appease Vladimir Putin. But of course, a future U.S. president may decide that actually, unless it sees more tangible cooperation from India on particular issues like Iran, actually it may decide, well, we should be more careful about what we sell the Indians. I think a Biden administration is going to be an interesting test of this. You will still see a pro-India stance. There's no doubt about it. But things like the S-400, which caused such a huge controversy with the Turkish government in America, may begin to become slightly more of an irritant with the United States down the line.
Well, there are many other questions, but time is short. So let me ask you a final one. India had plans for moving from a labor-intensive to a tech-intensive military. Now, with a two-front perceived threat and the economic slowdown, in fact, the military is looking for money. How do you see India coping with its modernization plans? Let me also add that apart from money, there are also structural issues here. For instance, I mean, if we look at what Ankit Mukherjee wrote in his very good book, The Absent Dialogue, we realize that unless those issues are actually addressed, modernization and other plans are either going to be extremely slow or perhaps not succeed at all.
I think that's absolutely right. Of course, India now has a chief of defense staff, a position that was much discussed for so many decades, going back to Nehru. But the chief of defense staff is not an operational position. It's an advisory position, and we still don't know the full extent of his responsibilities, how far he can compel these three co-equal services in India to jointness. This is an outstanding issue, and I still see continual headlines month after month telling me India is about to set up an aerospace command, a cyber command, a special forces command. And, I'm old enough to kind of roll my eyes at many of these headlines and to say, well, I remember you telling me about this 10 or 15 years ago. Nothing happened. I'm incredibly skeptical of that. And on the modernization side, yes, India is upgrading, particularly the IAF is now, modernization is proceeding quite well, I would say. In the Navy, the modernization is proceeding quite well. But Ejaz, as a defense journalist, spend a lot of my time writing about things like artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, counter-satellite capabilities, data-driven systems. Do I see a great deal of that in India, investment going towards those very high-end, bleeding-edge systems?
Right. Thank you. That was Shashnak Joshi speaking with us. I'm now joined by Dr. Naeem Salik, a former brigadier in Pakistan Army and former Director of Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs at the Strategic Plans Division. Dr. Salik, you were listening in on some of the responses from Shashnak Joshi. But let me begin with your perception of this two-front war rhetoric that's coming out of India, and the implication of this being a collusive threat, even though there's been absolutely no change in force posture or configuration on the Pakistani side. Is this for a political purpose? Is this some kind of strategic signaling? What exactly is this?
Ejaz, as you have said, these statements have started coming very recently. Although in the past, India has tried to be dismissive of Pakistan's indigenous capabilities and labeling everything which Pakistan fielded in terms of strategic weapon systems as having been borrowed or purchased from China. But now they have started talking about this two-front threat and the collusive threat, as the Indian Defense Minister termed it. The point is that I think if you unnecessarily create threats for yourself, you are creating problems. We have seen the example of Pakistan. We got worried about the two-front threat once we have had the Soviets in Afghanistan, and later on we were very mindful of any threat emerging from the western borders while we were engaged with India on the eastern border. And we created problems for ourselves by introducing terms like strategic depth and all that, which people misinterpreted, and then we were blamed for interfering in Afghanistan unnecessarily. Again, if you go back to the history, all those countries which have faced the two-front threat, they have never been able to cope with it successfully. Take the example of Germany. In the First World War, the Schlieffen Plan was all meant to find a solution from this the two-front threat which they saw for themselves. And that is why the whole plan was that they will launch an attack against France, and which will be completed within 6 weeks' time, and then they will be able to shift some forces from there to the Eastern Front, while the Russians were still mobilizing because of their greater geographical spaces. In the Second World War, again, they had the same problem, and they got some reprieve by signing an agreement with Stalin, and then took care of France, and then later on turned towards the Eastern Front. But once there was this Normandy landing and the attack in the West by the US and other allies, Western allies, then the Germans found themselves in a very difficult situation because they were unable to move forces from one front to the other. And also it was very difficult to logistically support both the fronts. So if they were not able to manage, I don't see Indians being able to conduct a successful two-front war, which they, I think, themselves creating for themselves. There are people in India who have suggested that, well, if you're worried about this collusive threat or a two-front threat, the best thing is to sort out your problems at least with one of the countries. If you can't resolve the problem with China, at least start negotiations with Pakistan and try to resolve political problems with Pakistan, so that at least you don't face that threat from the other side.
Right. But it doesn't seem to be working that way, obviously. And you're absolutely right. There are discerning analysts like Praveen Soni and others who say, well, work this out with Pakistan. But Dr. Salik, give me your sense of, since you are a keen observer of these developments across the eastern border, give me your sense and your reading of the modernization programs that India has.
India has embarked on the modernization plan in a big way, and particularly, I think, since they have started developing the strategic partnership with the United States, they have now access to the cutting-edge technology from the United States and other sources. They also have the resources to purchase these items of equipment. But the problem there is that I don't know where they are going to use these items, because even against Pakistan, they had to come down to the cold start and then to surgical strikes. So if you are unable to use your full potential because of the fear of escalation to the nuclear level, where would you use that kind of technology against China or Pakistan? So both adversaries which India has been talking about, they are both nuclear powers. And in that nuclear environment, there's very limited scope for a full-fledged conventional war where these kind of modern systems will deliver their actual impact. And once there is no space for that and you are operating in a very narrow band of a very limited scale war, then this impact will be lost.
Right. Shashank was saying that, there is a general sense that in this part of the world, the idea of waging war is at least, falls short by at least a decade as far as cutting edge technologies are concerned. So is this something that we look at with concern? Is it something in terms of R&D, indigenous R&D, or collaborations, for instance, with friendly countries like China, for instance, where we begin to look at developing our capabilities, thinking that the future battlefield is going to be highly integrated and digitized?
I think both India and Pakistan have been complacent because neither country was at the front end of the technological advanced militaries, and obviously we are still fighting in the where the Second World War was fought. But we cannot be oblivious to these technologies which are being introduced, like the cyber warfare, the hypersonic weapons which are coming in, and more so the growing role of the UAVs, the armed drones in the future battlefield. We have recently seen a small example of that in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as to what kind of damage these armed drones can do. And with the concept of drone swarms and all these things coming up, I think we'll have to do catching up at a very fast pace, because otherwise most of your capabilities, conventional capabilities, will be nullified by these. And if you have to deter the use of these modern technology against you, the only way to deter the use of these technologies is to have your own potential to hit back in the same terms. And that is why I think it is imperative for us to do some catching up and maybe seek assistance from our friends who are far more advanced in these fields. Otherwise, we'll be, I think, left far behind.
Okay, are you concerned because, and I ask this question because for a very long time, India used to talk about itself as a secular democratic polity. Now, under Narendra Modi, especially his second term, we have seen a very regressive ideology at play. And we have also seen that there is some infusion of that, or at least some kind of acceptance of this, in the Indian military also. Now, are you concerned that that is something which could change the approach of the Indian military, and also whether it makes it more sort of a risk taker in terms of actually launching an offensive, because since the ideology, they're all fired up with an ideology? Is that something that we need to talk about and need to signal to the rest of the world?
To the extent I have seen the Indian attitude in some of the tabletop exercises I have attended, and the track 2 dialogues where both Indians and Pakistanis were there, the Indian approach has generally been very heavy-handed and aggressive. I don't know whether they were posing or trying to posture because of these settings of the tabletop exercises, or the track 2 dialogue, because on ground nothing was actually going to happen. So you could talk as aggressively as you could. But the attitude is very clear that they are more risk acceptant, and generally they are dismissive of Pakistan's capabilities. And if that kind of attitude seeps deeply into their thinking, then they might, I think, blunder into some kind of actions which may be catastrophic not only for India but for the whole region. And that's definitely is something to worry about, because there are constraints because of the nuclearized and security environment in the region. And if somebody deliberately tries to ignore those realities and tries to take undue risks, trying their luck with that, playing chicken's game of chicken, then I think the situation could be very dangerous.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Naeem Salik speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss a statement by the International Atomic Energy Agency that Iran has started building an underground nuclear facility. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Our second story tonight is about a statement by the International Atomic Energy Agency that Iran has started building an underground nuclear facility. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, has told Associated Press that Iran has started building an underground centrifuge assembly plant after its previous one exploded in what Tehran called a sabotage attack. Following the July explosion at the Natanz nuclear site, Tehran said it would build a new, more secure structure in the mountains around the area. Satellite images of Natanz, analyzed by experts, have yet to show any obvious signs of construction at the site in Iran's central Isfahan province. They've started, but it's not completed, Grossi said. It's a long process. Natanz became a flashpoint for Western fears about Iran's nuclear program in 2002 when satellite photos showed Iran building an underground facility at the site about 200 kilometers south of the capital, Tehran. Natanz had been targeted by the Stuxnet computer virus previously, which was a joint US-Israeli operation. Iran has yet to say who it suspects of carrying out the sabotage in the July incident. Suspicion has fallen on Israel despite a claim of responsibility by a previously unheard of group at the time. To discuss this further, we are joined by Syed Mostafa khoshcheshm, a journalist and analyst. Mr. Khoshcheshm has also taught at a number of Iranian universities and academic centers, including the International Relations faculty of the Iranian Foreign Ministry. Thank you, Mr. Khoshcheshm, for being with us. A quick question before we go further. Is this something which is within the ambit of Iran's, responsibility towards the IAEA and the civil nuclear deal, or is this something outside of that?
Hello, and thanks for having me. No, it's outside of that. Here is a point that the place that there was a sabotage operation, it was a workshop, or it was to be a workshop to produce highly advanced centrifuge machines. They assembled different parts in there. And after the sabotage attack on that, workshop, Iran decided to build a place that's much more immune to different kinds of animosity and hostile attacks by Americans or the Israelis or both. And therefore, they said that they would go underground to, build a new workshop. But I believe Iran is also sending a second message through this move to let the Europeans and Americans understand that when they do a hostile move, then it would have repercussions for them, and Iran would go further in order to, protect its nuclear achievements and nuclear industries. As a matter of fact, if there hadn't been this sabotage attack, then Tehran would have not gone after building an underground facility to assemble this centrifuge machines or highly advanced centrifuge machines. This is the result of the U.S. animosity. But also there could be speculations that such attacks by the United States and Israel are meant to do so. There are some experts in the West who believe that the U.S. is attacking Iran, sanctioning Iran to push Tehran towards further advancement in area of nuclear technology. Tehran has proved to be independent in its decisions. It has been trying not to be provoked by anyone. But this move is certainly meant to send the message to the IAEA and especially to the United States that if they continue to do so, then Tehran would have no other way but to increase its, measures, security measures, and this is the result of their hostile moves.
And the IAEA, since I mentioned Rafael Grossi, who is the IAEA Director General, Is the IAEA okay with this, or is the IAEA objecting to this? What exactly is because he did not give any further details except what I mentioned in my opening.
This is outside the boundaries of the JCPOA. The JCPOA speaks of research and development periods for that. Of course, Tehran has modified those parts of the JCPOA, but even if Iran was in full compliance, or if this happened maybe a couple of years ago, a year ago, when Iran was still in full compliance with regard to the period and the duration of limitations mentioned in JCPOA, they were no way related to this center. The JCPOA deals with the number of years that Iran should wait before it could eventually produce highly advanced centrifuge machines. We are through with that period, as a matter of fact. When Iran modified its undertakings, it was after the 4-year-long period that it should have waited. But anyway, building this workshop is no way related to the limitations that Iran undertook under the JCPOA. Beyond that, Iran has modified everything except for the most important part. That 1/3 of the nuclear deal pertained to the inspections and to the implementation of the additional protocol to the NPT. Iran undertook 3 main parts in the under the JCPOA. One was with regard to building centrifuge machines and enrichment and so on and so forth. It has modified it. The other one was pertained to the Iraq heavy water reactor that Iran has also modified that part, but is still going along the same plan to renew the heart of Iraq heavy water reactor. But the third part, which is the most important part, includes uncalled visits and implementation of the additional protocol to the NPT, which is the most important one because it provides the IAEA with the harshest regime of inspections ever imposed on any nation. 80% of uncalled visits carried out all throughout the world under the additional protocol last year was in Iran. So Iran is still in compliance with this part, with this, inspections. And when the IAEA inspectors visited Natanz and enrichment facilities, they, walked along this hall, but they never visited it because it was not included in the JCPOA. They went to the underground facility to see how Iran is enriching, the level of enrichment, the machines that are working, and so on and so forth. They, as far as I know, visiting this workshop that came under a sabotage attack was never part of the deal and was not included in the inspections because it was about, R&D and assembling the centrifuges, but not launching them or installing them. So I do believe that the IAEA is playing once again the same role that it played a decade ago when, according to Garrett Porter, investigative journalist, the Israelis fabricated documents and put it in a laptop, gave it to the MKO or Mujahideen Khalq organization, a terrorist organization, with the blood of 17,000 Iranian citizens and officials on their hand, and they took the laptop to the German security, as interviewed and quoted by Garrett Porter in his book, Iran's Nuclear Scare, a Fabricated Crisis, that's the title. He quotes the security chief of Germany as telling him that in the first stance and at the first glance, as soon as we saw the laptop, we realized that it was a fake document. It was very easy to understand. But a year later, when we were approached by our American counterparts with the same documents and laptops, claiming that they show suspicious activities by Iran towards developing a military nuclear program, we were stunned because we thought our American counterparts should be very naive. That doesn't seem to be the case. And the only option is that they intend to fool us or to test us. So the same story happened in there when the Americans started this game with the Israelis and MKO. They gave the laptop to the IAEA. Iran requested the then head of the IAEA several times, frequently, to provide us with the original, the documents or witness or whatever they have to prove the allegations. First, they denied. They never presented Tehran with the documents. But at last, when they did so, it was very much clear that they were fake. But they called it possible military dimension of Iran's nuclear program. And it was underway for quite a long time. Iran went under sanctions, so much hardship. The nation was under much pressure for this laptop that everybody knew was just a fake and forged laptop documents. But on the eve of the JCPOA, the same day that Iran and the world powers signed this JCPOA, the IAEA issued a statement saying that after quite a long time, so many pressures and sanctions, they have come up with the final result. They issued a final statement. The IAEA did so. They issued a statement saying that the possible military dimensions of Iran is, wrapped up, and the IAEA studies show that Iran has never moved towards developing a military nuclear capability. That meant a lot because the PMD case was wrapped up, finished, first. Second, it proved that Iran was honest, Iran was right, that Iran never moved towards a military nuclear program, and it was under pressure for more than a decade because of one forged laptop document that everybody, including the Western intelligence agencies, at least the German security agency and its chief, they all knew that it was fake, but they continued this game. So it shows us that it's a political game, and the IAEA has become an instrument in the hands of the world powers to pressure Tehran. Otherwise, Mr. Gerussi should have never ever doubted about cooperation with Iran and Iran's move, especially considering that Iran has so far done favor to the IAEA and provided them with access to the facilities they have requested more than what it has undertaken under the JCPOA.
Right. Was a detailed exposition by Syed Mostafa Khoshcheshm. Before I wrap up, on a lighter note, Mr. Khoshcheshm, is Tehran praying for a Biden win?
No. As a matter of fact, Tehran says that there is no difference between the two because neither Donald Trump nor Biden has undertaken to get back to the JCPOA to lift the sanctions without any preconditions. We all know about Donald Trump, but Biden gave an article on CNN last month where he said that he wants an updated version of the JCPOA where the limitations or the sunset clauses should be extended. That means a change in the JCPOA, and Iran has always stressed that it wouldn't accept any change to the JCPOA. And Biden has also conditioned the United States' return to the JCPOA or the updated JCPOA on the fact that Iran should guarantee that it would go along the same path for several or multiple JCPOAs over regional issues, Iran's missile defense program, Iran's ties with a number of countries, and a recognition of Israel and guaranteeing Israel's security.
That's obviously a non-starter. Thank you so much. That was Syed Mostafa Khoshcheshm speaking with us. This is all from In Focus this week. We shall see you next Monday at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.